Today I wanted to do a review of something interesting that's come my way recently. This saber is from a company called Bendu Armory. Now Bendu Armory is fairly new, they're just starting out, and they're trying to build their design inventory. But what they specialize in is something rather interesting, which is carbon fiber hilts. So let me talk about that real quick, and then I'll show you around this saber and what it has to offer. Carbon fiber is something you're probably familiar with. It exists in a lot of different capacities. Carbon fiber weaves will be accents on watches or fancy golf clubs or whatever. But carbon fiber sabers is something I haven't seen too very much of. I've seen it a couple times in past. Somewhere in the hobbyists market, I've seen some people tinkering with carbon fiber tubes to make lightsabers. Also, this piece right here was a carbon fiber sleeve from Kyberlite. But usually lightsabers are made out of aircraft-grade aluminum or some other kind of aluminum, sometimes steel or zinc tube, but almost always metal. So carbon fiber is a different material. The benefits that carbon fiber has, it is very lightweight all by itself, which is actually something of a benefit and something of a detractor. I'll talk about that when I talk about the saber. But carbon fiber is very lightweight, and carbon fiber done well is virtually indestructible. There are some problems that you can run into working with carbon fiber. Like, for instance, in this Kyberlite part, they drilled the holes through the carbon fiber tube, and there's some area around the outside where it gets rough, and there's a potential to get a carbon fiber splinter if you run your finger over it too fast. And carbon fiber splinters are a pretty serious problem because you're dealing with an ultra-durable material that's now embedded in your flesh. So that's something that you really don't want to have happen. But some of the dangers with carbon fiber are things like that. The benefits, like I said, it's light, and it's, if done well, virtually indestructible. So let me talk about Bendu Armory and basically their theory behind these carbon fiber hilts, and then I'll show you around these. Bendu Armory's design, I brought up the Kyberlite earlier. The reason is that their design and their basic concept is very similar. Kyberlite sold you one lightsaber, and then they sold you all kinds of different things that went on top of the lightsaber. So as opposed to having multiple hilts, you have one hilt that you can dress up in vastly different ways. Bendu Armory has taken that one step further. They don't have one hilt, but what they do have is what they call their swappable chassis system. So let me show you that real quick, and then we'll talk about the outer hilts. But the swappable chassis system, basically you take their hilts, you unscrew the blade set screw, or the blade retention screw, you unscrew the cover tech wheel with the same wrench, and then the sleeve of the saber slides right out, and here you have what they call their swappable chassis system. Now this thing works really well all by itself. You wouldn't want to take it out because the board is exposed back here. But there's your access to the board, there's your memory card, down here's your speaker, up here's your battery, pull tab. They have two different chassis that they're dealing with. One of them is their basic chassis, which is basically if you were to cut this off right here and attach it up there, that'd be the basic chassis. It's a little bit shorter. Or this one, which is what they call their, I think it's a legionnaire chassis, which is the same basic thing except it has a crystal chamber in it. Now the chassis and everything, like I said, it works independently of the handle. Let me go ahead and turn that on. Alright, now you can see that the crystal chamber right here lights up as well. This is currently running a purple, the crystal is blue. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but the crystal is RGB as well. So when I switch this off, and I switch it over to a different sound font, okay, this one is a white sound font, or a white font, so when I turn this on, through the blade it's kind of greenish, but you can see the crystal is kind of a pinkish. I'll switch it again. And there's red. Solid red crystal. I've got an unstable flicker built into it here. So we've got a crystal chamber. Now this crystal chamber is basically the same setup that Custom Saber Shop uses. The cables run through it here. They're wrapped in a protective casing so that the cables don't they aren't exposed wire. There's like a black cord that runs through behind the crystal. Crystal is set in right there. The crystal is a synthetic. It's not real quartz, but it looks a whole lot like real quartz. But this is basically their swappable chassis system. And so you slide it out of one hilt, you slide it into another hilt, put your two screws back in, and you have a completely different looking saber. So the swappable chassis system is rather a neat design. So that's basically what they're doing. They sell you one chassis with one hilt, and then later down the road you can buy additional hilt sleeves and have a completely different looking saber. Now most of the stuff, I said that they're specialized in carbon fiber. These days they are looking into some aluminum ones. They have a set of Ahsoka hilts that are aluminum, and I saw them recently with a Ezra Bridger blaster hilt that was also aluminum. And the aluminum hilts are they're machined by the guy over at TCSS or Custom Saber Shop, I believe. And the pommels they're working on are going to be MHS compatible. So basically, it's aluminum with this U groove cut into it to work with their swappable chassis system. And then you can swap out the pommels with your other Ultra Sabers pommels or Custom Saber Shop pommels. So it's a neat idea. In terms of the functionality of the Saber itself, a little bit more about this chassis. This is a well-designed chassis and it's pretty dang secure. Mine is actually wobbling a little bit because I need to tighten this little set screw right here and right here. Okay. The other elements of the chassis, this part up here is steel and it's colored with gun color or gun black. There's a screw right here above the button. That screw is the set screw for the LED. Over on the other side, there's the screw for the cover tech wheel and the screw for the blade retention. And those are the two screws that hold on the chassis. We've just got hold on the hilt. We've just got two holes in the hilt up here. So that's the basic design of the chassis. It's a neat design, a neat idea to not have to sell people internals every time you sell them a different saber. I like the idea of being able to customize a saber to this extent. So let me talk about the carbon fiber and the carbon fiber designs a little bit. First, let me introduce you to this one here. This is the Obsidian design, and this was their flagship. It features a slight curve towards the end, very broad handle. I really like this design because it kind of reminds me of a squid. We got the mantle cavity up here, and I kind of dig that. The weaves that they have on this, you can get different weaves in the carbon fiber. So on this one, I'll give you a close-up of this real quick in just a moment. But this one has a red Kevlar and black carbon fiber weave underneath, and then it's got carbon fiber on top. One of the things that you may not be able to see on camera when I give you a close-up on this is everywhere that this is dark gray, if you see it in direct sunlight, it doesn't look solid matte gray. The carbon fiber is gives it a really interesting sheen that gives it some 3D depth. And where the carbon fiber grain changes direction slightly around the edges, the sheen changes. It actually reminds me a lot of old-timey top hats that they used to make out of beaver pelt. That's what it kind of looks like in the sun. So let me go ahead and give you a close-up of this hilt real quick so that you can see the red Kevlar and black carbon fiber weave. So very interesting design on there. This is their other carbon fiber design. This is the Radium, which is a straight design, a little bit of a bell towards the end, kind of an organic feel to it. This one specifically is, I think they called this a digital pattern, but what we've got here is a digital weave that's got sort of a honeycomb look to it. It actually has some really interesting 3D depth, and then over top of that they've put a clear coat of what I'm told is e-glass. So let me go ahead and give you a close-up of this real quick. Alright, now Now, this one was a prototype, so it contains some imperfections that some of the others won't have. But in terms of imperfections, that's something that I wanted to look at with these. The advantages of the carbon fiber, it is dang near indestructible. I have been encouraged to be rough with these things, and I've shot videos of throwing this thing around just hollow like this, and throwing it around and dropping it on concrete with the internals in it. And the carbon fiber itself gets some light scuffs to the clear epoxy overlayer, but it doesn't actually get any dents that make it into the carbon fiber. As soon as it gets through that clear epoxy, it stops. So the durability on these is ridiculous. The other nice thing about them is I mentioned carbon fiber done well and carbon fiber not done well. These things, all of the edges have been sanded and coated, so all these edges in here are not even remotely sharp. And there's really no chance that you're going to end up getting a splinter from the carbon fiber anywhere in here. So that's nice. The disadvantages of the carbon fiber design, you're stuck with kind of an organic design. Now, these sorts of designs are great for things like Legacy era or Old Republic era sabers. But if you're looking for one of those cannon hilts, you really need to go with aluminum, in which case you get the advantage of the swappable chassis, but you give up the hyper durability of the carbon fiber weaves. The other bad thing about the carbon fiber weaves is they are an imperfect system in order to make these. No matter how you cut it with these things, you're always going to end up with design flaws, slight flaws. Like, for instance, you will be able, if you look for it, to see a seam on here. Now, that was true of these. It was also true of the Kyberlite part I showed you earlier. Whenever you're dealing with a carbon fiber, there's a place where the weave ends and then begins again. So if you look carefully enough, you'll be able to see a seam. Also, you can notice that parts of it sort of ride up onto other parts. So you don't get super clean lines between the division of the parts of your saber. Let me go ahead and give you a close-up of what I'm talking about, but when you see right here on this saber, you're going to see that some of that red Kevlar has worked its way up onto the gray rise there. Alright, now those little flecks and those little imperfections, the lines on this, the bad news about those is if you really like sabers that are perfect in terms of all the lines, carbon fiber is a much more organic medium, and you're not going to get that. You're not going to get the uniformity that you get with something like aluminum. The good news is that because you don't get that uniformity, you do get a much more organic look to your saber hilt, and also each saber is essentially unique in terms of the little slight eccentricities that one hilt will have to the next hilt. So that part is a bonus. The thing about this saber, I mentioned that the carbon fiber is super durable. You do have protruding metal here around the button. So in terms of dings that it will get when you drop it, or if you drop it from a distance, the damage that you're going to get is along this metal right here. So the carbon fiber design, super interesting, super durable, very organic, and if this is your deal, this is a really nice way to go. I actually really like this Obsidian hilt. It reminds me quite a bit of Vader's first hilt in the newer comic book series that he stole from a Jedi and corrupted. It's got sort of that slight curve to it. Reminds me a lot of that. But so that is very neat. In terms of the chassis, benefits versus or good things versus bad things. The swappable chassis system is great. I love the idea of being able to pick up an extra sleeve and have a completely different looking saber. The system itself within here, the crystal chamber is really nice and clean. I don't know if it's just this model or if it's going to be something that you're going to get from model to model, but the color on the crystal, or the RGB on the crystal, doesn't quite seem to match the color on the blade most of the time. I was also having a little bit of trouble getting white on this because of the mix, but color mixing is a little bit eccentric, and getting the crystal to match the blade color when you're not just dealing with a solid color. If you're just dealing with red, green, or blue, it's easy. It matches perfectly. But if you start dealing with blends, the blend is a little bit different here than it is up here. The other thing about this is that the weight on it is all right here. Now, the carbon fiber is virtually weightless, but the chassis itself is where the weight comes from. And they've actually built these so that they are to the specifications of Ludosport, which is a lightsaber dueling academy and fighting academy, mostly in Europe. But Ludosport had a regulation weight, and so they built these so that they meet that regulation weight. The difficulty is that the battery doesn't weigh a whole lot. The chassis itself doesn't weigh a whole lot. Most of the weight is this steel bit right here, which means that when you're spinning the saber or using it, hold that ribbon down, there we go. When you're spinning the saber or using it, there's not a lot of weight back here. Most of the weight is right here, which means you are wielding it pretty close to the point of balance. Now that causes it to behave a little bit erratically sometimes until you get used to that different point of balance. If you ever handle the saber from back here, it feels like you're swinging a hammer. If you handle it up here, it feels pretty good. But if you let your hand slip back, it starts to behave a little bit differently than a lot of sabers that you're used to being counterweighted from the end. Now there's a little bit of room in here, so you could add some weight to the pommel section down here on the chassis to sort of counter that a little bit if you wanted. But that's just something about the use of it as it sits. Another detraction from this, the set screw that they use and the CoverTech wheel that they use, this system isn't quite perfect yet. The set screw sticks out a bit, and the CoverTech wheel sits up here at the top. Now this is actually really great if you're wearing the saber on your belt. It hangs really well from up here, except for the fact that if you put a blade in it, the set screws for the blade sticks out a little bit too much, so it gets in the way of your CoverTech clip when you're wearing this on a CoverTech. So if you're wearing it with the blade, it actually kind of hangs like a musketeer sword, which is kind of cool. But the set screw gets in the way of the CoverTech wheel. The other detraction about this is by placing the CoverTech up here, by where your hand is, they've put a knob where I don't like there being a knob. Usually I like the CoverTechs down here somewhere where it's not going to get in your way. Now this up here, it stops your hand from sliding up onto the blade, so that part of it is nice. And the CoverTechs are from TCSS, so they're nicely rounded and beveled. The difficulty is that if you try to do anything fancy like a contact move, and this thing is weighted well enough for a contact move, this knob right here prevents the saber from rolling because it creates a lump that gets in your way and can cause you problems on a catch or something like that. Personally, I'm actually going to take this CoverTech wheel off and replace it with an additional screw that's going to keep the hilt or keep the sleeve on the chassis. But so CoverTech wheel and set screw are a little bit odd. Point of balance is a little bit odd, but everything else about this saber handles like a dream. And the durability of it, I said that I've shot some videos of throwing this thing around. They encouraged me to be rough with it, and I've been super rough with it, and this thing has held up. The only place that there's damage in extreme circumstances is the speaker itself can pop out. I've talked to them about that, and they said they're going to start putting just a little bit of secure or something to secure it in there a little bit better because it's press fit at current. I put a little something in there to secure it, and on extreme circumstances it will still pop out. But you pull open the chassis, you pop the speaker back in, and you're good to go. The crystal I expected to fall out. The crystal never budged. That thing is set in there perfectly. It never even remotely decided to come out. The other thing is, in extreme circumstances, the memory chip in here that holds your sound font, that thing can bounce out of the board. That's something that'll happen in any saber, but when you're dealing with something that is as durable as these, it's virtually encouraging you to be a little bit rougher with it. So that's where you're going to experience the wear and tear and the breakage first, is the speaker and the memory card for the board. The rest of this is really well put in here. So this is the Bendu Armory Obsidian and the Bendu Armory Radium and the Bendu Armory Legionnaire chassis system. So hopefully this video has been of use to you. I'll put a spin test and a durability test link in the description for this video. So if you want to watch me throw this at concrete, just scroll down and look at the link in the description. And I'm sure you'll be seeing this around because I like this saber quite a bit, so I'm going to be using it rather heavily. I'll see you next time, and if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe, and I'll see you then.